Welcome to the 10th anniversary of REIMAGINE 2021. Presented by Mousebelt. Coming up next.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to REIMAGINE 2021 version 10. So this is our 10th edition anniversary. We've been doing these virtual conference events for the past year, really. And we want to thank all of our supporters, all of our sponsors out there, and all of our great guests who have come on and had great conversations. So, our main goals are to spread education in the space, have good, productive conversations, and really highlight the next generation of builders. It's been a very interesting year in the crypto and blockchain space, a lot of different stakeholders. I'm Roshan Mirajkar. I'm one of your hosts for today, and I'm very excited to bring you a new guest here at REIMAGINE. So with me here today, I have Matthew Niemerg, who is the president at Aleph Zero. So Matthew, welcome to the show. And just tell us a little bit about how you got into the space and how have the past few months been for you and your team.
Thanks, Roshan. It's been quite a journey. So I've been in the space since late 2014. So the reason I originally got into this was at that time, everybody was saying that Bitcoin was this global remittance solution, right? And I was just getting ready to do, I had just finished up my PhD work out at Colorado State University, and was getting ready to do a couple of a postdoc overseas in Beijing at Tsinghua University. So, before all that, it was just joint position with out at UC Berkeley at the Simons Institute. So while I was at Berkeley, I was trying to figure out, well, there's all this talk about Bitcoin and it's a global remittance solution, as I said earlier. Well, I had to pay for my my apartment and everything ahead of time. I wanted to kind of get some money into the Chinese renminbi prior to getting over there. And the problem was that there weren't really any banking services, where you could, because of the export, the currency export controls and all of that. But my primary concern was just paying for my apartment on campus at the time, sort of ahead of time. So, I remembered getting the early cryptographic emails during grad school regarding Bitcoin, and had kind of followed it in sort of from the periphery for quite some time. But then, I was like, okay, well, if this is what the community is saying this can be used for as a global remittance, then maybe I should try to use it. So I, started buying Bitcoin, contacted a couple of exchanges in China, try to see if anybody could actually offer a remittance service, cut a check if I sent them Bitcoin, or, bring the money down to the university and pay for my behalf. And lo and behold, while the community is sort of touting these properties of what the technology can do, nobody was actually offering that service. I mean, and this is primarily due to money transmission laws and other regulatory aspects that restrict actually businesses from performing these types of services. So this was initially my original reason and foray to get into crypto. Like I said, I'd been following it since the beginning, but just really never had taken the plunge. So whenever I started buying, I started looking into, all the, sort of the math and the academic side. So the consensus protocols, how the Nakamoto consensus worked, and sort of some of the digital signatures and the cryptography that was needed, and sort of these different paradigms, and sort of why these systems really operated. And it was really fascinating, right? I mean, you have this sort of amalgamation of a bunch of different topics within the academic world on the math side. So cryptography, game theory, distributed systems, all of this kind of melded together. And it was just fascinating. It was just really fun. And then after that, we started seeing this, sort of the 2017 ICO era. Did a lot, just following different projects and sort of seeing where the industry was going as far as different use cases and applications of the technology. And sort of at the end of that, just kind of was a little tired of a lot of the hype that went into that time span. A lot of projects would essentially just sort of pitch themselves as having a lot of substance whenever they really didn't. And there was a lack of education within the market itself to the general crypto community. And I thought that there was quite a bit of a disservice whenever it came to that. So then I came across some of the other co-founders at Aleph Zero, sort of got together and was saying, hey, we can really do this a lot better than what is currently being done. And sort of that was how we initially started. So one of the guiding principles that we have is we really wanted to focus on the core fundamentals. And by this, we really focus primarily on consensus protocols and having proper peer review and an understanding of the security models that go into these distributed systems. So the idea here was, instead of just, throwing together white paper and slapping it together and then pushing it out there and then trying to raise capital, the idea is more about how can we make sure we have a solid, understanding of the underlying security models, and then from there innovate on top of what's already been done, and then from there go ahead and implement. And this is before really doing a lot of raising for any money. And so the idea here is that, if we can actually build products prior, and bring these to the market prior to, releasing, the whatever it is that we've been developing to the community, it just looks a lot better, right? You actually have a little bit more, you have less hype that goes with it. You have more product and substance. So this was, sort of our initial goal was, how can we, be more middle of the road, offer better products and services, and just essentially do, whatever it is that the space was doing in 2017, do it, as in the way that we saw that was a little bit more, I don't know, egalitarian, so to speak, right?
Yeah, and talking a little bit about it's very interesting that you come from kind of an academic background and you've actually looked at a lot of these security models out there. So what can you tell us about it in your view? Like, what are some of the dangers or things that are overlooked right now in terms of security? Like, I know one of them is MEV attacks on something like Ethereum or other chains. So and I want to go a little bit more into what Aleph Zero is actually building as well. But for the security side, like, is there a difference between what you would recommend for a retail user versus like an enterprise companies?
Right. So there's a lot to unpack in that. Whenever you want to think about these distributed systems, this is essentially, this has been stuff that we've been working on in for the past 4 decades, at least within the academic community. So how do you this all boils down to the problem of consensus and the Byzantine generals problem. The primary difference that you have in the Bitcoin and the Ethereum and sort of these public permissionless platforms is that you move away from a model where you have known entities that are performing the validation process that are running a consensus protocol. And instead you have some type of civil resistant mechanism to elect a particular authority or a group of people that will be participating in some consensus mechanism. And this is sort of where you sort of depart from the classical and the more traditional methods that have been deployed for the last really if you think about it, for the last 2 decades, whenever we're talking about distributed databases. So with that, the underlying security model for just normal consensus is pretty straightforward. At least in the permission setting, you need to prove, essentially two different properties, namely liveness and safety. So liveness is this concept of being able to guarantee that you're going to eventually make a decision regarding whether or not a bit that's being communicated across this distributed network is a 0 or a 1. And then safety is a guarantee saying that all participants are going to choose the same value as long as they're being honest. And then all of this sort of operates under the assumption that you have more than 2/3 being honest actors. Now, this is the case for a classical and more traditional Byzantine fault tolerant algorithm. And this is deployed pretty much like in your basic databases that have been around, like MySQL, NoSQL. You can use BadgerDB, FaunaDB, RocksDB. All of these are databases that have been that have for most part some type of default consensus algorithm made available so that you can have a distributed system. So now how does this diverge into this new paradigm? Well, instead of having a fixed authority set that is running this consensus protocol, now you're having people who may be elected by proof of stake, by proof of work. And in the Bitcoin sense, you have a single authority, whoever wins the puzzle hash for the proof of work binding scheme is the only person who has the authority of adding a block for a particular, for that next, onto the blockchain. Whereas in sort of this sort of the next generation in these hybrid models, what has been going on is that you elect a committee of people who will, for a short period of time, operate a permissioned and classical consensus protocol. And this is probably where you kind of have a little bit of a difference between the Nakamoto consensus and things like Tezos or Cosmos or Aleph and sort of what all these other protocols are doing and how they're operating nowadays. So the way to think about this is that understanding of the security is pretty well, we kind of just, it's given to us, right? Like this has been going on for decades. We don't really have to dive terribly deep into the subtle nuances. The biggest difference that you have to be wary about is how do things change whenever you move from a permission model to a permissionless model. And that's I don't want to necessarily go terribly deep into the formalism on that front, but that's where you would have to focus to make sure that things are more secure. Now, as far as the miner extraction value problem that we're seeing within DeFi, the issue here is more about, you have these validators, you have miners, right? So essentially anybody who is able to place transactions onto the blockchain, they have that ability of front running or putting in their own transactions prior to somebody else. So you're a regular user, you're submitting your transaction for a trade to the distributed network, and now the question becomes, well, if you have this other group of people who are the miners or the validators, they're the ones who are receiving all the messages, and they have now that ability of creating their own message for a trade that front runs somebody else, or maybe does a sandwich attack, or there's a whole slew of potential scenarios that come down to this. So the way that you can approach how to solve this is something more along the lines of using some type of encryption whenever it comes to the actual transaction itself. And you have some type of, use multi-party computation essentially to sort of distribute different shares of secrets. And these secrets are given to a bunch of different, some different set of essentially validators. Different validators than the ones who are running the normal consensus. And you want to automate a process that sort of makes it so that they commit some information on chain. And then that information is included at the same time that you have a normal transaction for say, a swap against, say, a liquidity pool, like in say, Uniswap. But then, so they include this sort of extra information where they do some type of commitment scheme. And then after, say, K blocks, K is some parameter, it could be 5, 10, whatever it is, this information is automatically revealed. So you do this commitment scheme, and then you do a reveal after you did the commitment. So then the idea is that people can verify that the revelation that's being made regarding the underlying data corresponds to the commitment. And now at this point, you can go ahead and do the execution of the underlying transaction that did, either the swap on this liquidity pool. So this is one way of thinking about how you can approach solving this miner extraction value problem, where you have some of these transactions end up becoming encrypted, but then become decrypted and executed after a point. So you kind of are decoupling consensus from the actual execution of the state transitions themselves. So that's that's our approach to solving this miner extraction value problem.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because with something like Ethereum, definitely it's different, right? Like exactly what you said, they can see the transactions, but they're also the ones kind of who you're relying on for the consensus. There might be a mismatch of values or incentives, or I would say like there is an incentive to front run. I mean, it's a competition in a sense.
So I mean, so what is it? It's more like it's information asymmetry, right? So you have some people who are providing information to these validators, and now from here, they have the ability of using that information to create, or essentially mimic the transactions and to create some type of arbitrage. And so the idea here is that not everybody is a validator, right? Not everybody is a miner. Not everybody has that ability of being elected to approve the set of transactions that you want to, include in the new block.
And what do you think? Sorry, I had a question before we get too deep here. Like, what do you think about the applications of DeFi with enterprises? I know you have some interesting thoughts on like using public blockchains, and what can you tell us? Like, what are the considerations for enterprises to use DeFi with some of the themes that we were talking about here, like control and just open information that may not be well suited for them?
So I think that the biggest question ends up becoming is more regulatory, right? And this is all dependent on jurisdiction. Whenever it comes to institutions interacting with DeFi, a lot of it is just lack of knowledge and education as to how to do so. Maybe they have different risk tolerances, and so they don't want to directly interact with themselves, even if they may have the complete legal ability to do so. So for whatever reason, being a little bit more on the conservative side whenever it comes to custodying and managing other people's assets and so on and so forth, they're just operating under a different business model. So what you would have is these other companies that will come in and who are taking on some of that, that they have that information as to how to directly interact with these different DeFi protocols. And they kind of provide this sort of time arbitrage solution for providing services to institutions where they have maybe all the appropriate licenses, and they're working with the regulators, and they're sort of creating this type of institutional trust, so that now they these other corporates can come in and go directly through them, as opposed to going through to the actual DeFi protocols directly. I mean, there's other things like, whenever you look at all the different rug pulls and attacks that have happened in the last year, I mean, it's an insane industry, right? So if these institutions don't necessarily have like dedicated game theoretical mathematicians who are monitoring and saying, well, this is how we can avoid this type of miner extraction value problem, or this is how we can not have a rug pull scenario, or we don't have code auditors, and they just don't necessarily have the human resources as far as being able to audit code, or to really understand a lot of this the underlying decentralized natures of these protocols. then they can offload that to some other company that's basically doing that work for them on their behalf. And it's just, this is how I think a lot of it is moving. The question ends up becoming, I mean, in a lot of ways, you have this KYC versus non-KYC sort of a question that we're seeing now within these different liquidity pools or money market accounts and so on and so forth. So, I think it's also dependent on the jurisdiction. You might have some jurisdictions where corporates are allowed to interact with non-KYC accounts, and then you might have jurisdictions where it's really frowned upon or it's not allowed. And I think it's early days. We don't really know in a lot of sense, but I think that you'll see sort of a segmentation of product offerings, whether or not you have fully KYC liquidity pools versus some liquidity pools that are not necessarily KYC'd. And, you're going to get people who are legally able to, operate in both worlds, right? And be able to bridge that gap. So there's going to always be some type of arbitrage, whether or not you think of it as jurisdictional arbitrage or time arbitrage before education kind of spreads through to most of these institutions. And I think that's how you're going to see either the current incumbent players come about and sort of offer these types of products and services, or you're going to see new companies come out that are able to bridge that gap.
Yeah, actually, that's what I was going to sort of ask you about next. Like, I know you all are focused kind of specifically on the privacy element for enterprises as well. So, is there anything interesting that's happened just during this COVID timeframe? Because a lot of like supply chains around the world have failed. A lot of the applications and our money itself, you can argue like a lot of these things are failing or they're getting put through the stress test now. So, for the enterprise side, like, how do you sort of view it? Do you view it as the traditional finance or traditional players might adopt your platform and the technology you're building? Or do you think it could be like new startups building, let's say, enterprise products that could use something like Aleph Zero to just totally destroy the incumbents or get an advantage and just never go back? Like, how do you sort of look at these things? And yeah, tell us about any interesting stories or events that have happened during this time, if you have any.
Sure. No, I think in answer to your question, I think it's going to be both. I think you'll see corporates that have, maybe more mandates from their CEOs or their, to go ahead and solve a particular problem, right? Where they say, look, we have an inventory management problem, we have a supply chain problem. We think that we can save some money if we go ahead and deploy on some type of blockchain solution. Go out and find the best solution out there. And I think that what's happening is, for the most part, you have longer sales cycles whenever it comes to corporates, right? So they take a long time to go ahead and choose a technology stack. They go ahead and do plenty of due diligence and so on and so forth. And the ones that are more innovative, or also who have a deeper understanding of how this can improve their bottom line and save them money, which is essentially what we're saying that is the premise of blockchain. At the end of the day, it's essentially a more efficient solution. So efficiency should, at the end, go ahead and equate to more savings. So the question now becomes, is the savings that you're going to actually have going to exceed the cost of deploying on this new platform or on any new solution? I mean, to me, it seems rather obvious that in the long run, this is going to be the case, right? So it's not a question of if, it's more of a question of when. And then, at the same time, because you have more agility with the new startups and these smaller companies, they're able to identify niche products, niche solutions that they can come in and quickly develop as a, and basically being able to offer that to the larger enterprises, or have the buyout potential and acquisition potential for for their solutions. So I think there's a bit of a I think there's a bit of both that's happening, and it's just a question of what people want to do and so on.
Yeah, and I know another like sort of stakeholder or another element in your ecosystem is developers, right? So what sort of like tutorials, or how have you sort of been providing like developer support in terms of, do you guys support different chains? Are you guys focused on a couple of chains? And what are some of the challenges or advice you could give to maybe traditional developers looking to like get converted over?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're building using Substrate. So what we've done is taken essentially the existing Polkadot layer for Substrate for deploying blockchains there, and have added in our own consensus mechanism. So the Aleph BFT, the finality gadget. So we essentially replaced Grandpa with Aleph BFT, and then we essentially get to inherit the entire very modular technology stack that's been developed by Parity and supported by Web3. But now, as far as developers and what they should be sort of getting interested in, really we're starting to see a bigger shift to people deploying smart contracts using WebAssembly. There's a lot more interest with some of the more core sort of core development happening on Rust. But as a smart contract developer, I think just having an understanding of WebAssembly and virtual machines and sort of understanding some of these other languages that will compile to WASM and being able to deploy applications that way will help tremendously. And then as far as some of the other things that we're focusing on with privacy and what chains we're supporting, what we're building out with Liminal, which is is essentially a multi-chain privacy framework. How you want to think about it is that the privacy solution sort of happens all on chain, under the hood on Aleph itself, but we allow for, via bridges, these various privacy bridges, anybody else with a smart contract that's been deployed on Ethereum or on Cosmos or on any other chain that we have some type of bridge to, you can go ahead and offload the privacy sort of computations to be done on Aleph, and then things happen there internally, and then you get a result back. So the idea is to kind of offer a more modular product that allows for any developer with even an existing solution on any other chain, as long as we have a bridge to go ahead and connect and use our solution. And we're actually, what we're doing is actually quite novel. So we're doing a two-pronged approach whenever it comes to privacy. One is using zero knowledge proofs, and these come with say ZK snarks or ZK starks and so on and so forth. And you can kind of think of this as being able to give you local privacy. So if you have a single computer that has a particular state or has the ability of modifying an account, right, then they can do some type of computations or the zero knowledge proof where they can guarantee, via this proof, that there exists some type of approved state transitions to get to a new state. And the idea now is that you don't necessarily have to make the actual transactions that are being performed to get to the new state public. All you need to be able to do is show this proof. And this is sort of essentially how, in a lot of ways, this is what's used for batching transactions and sort of the different types of scalability solutions that we're seeing come out of Ethereum with ZK rollups and so on. The other type of privacy solution is more about having a global state that's private. And this is where you have, we use our multi-party computation techniques. So what we're doing is this sort of two-pronged approach that combines zero knowledge proofs with multi-party computation to give a more holistic framework to offer a wider range of potential privacy solutions. So that includes sort of anonymous transactions as well as anonymous and confidential computing.
Yeah, I think those are great features. And even for like the regular everyday person, we're trying to get more new people exposed to these technologies or these products. They might not essentially understand something like ZK snarks directly, but I think, one of the main things that people should get from this conversation as well is like a lot of these blockchain technologies, consensus protocols enable you to, again, prove that you are the owner of something, or prove or enable you to do a transaction without revealing all of your different public attributes like we do in the traditional world. So, one of my last questions, and I'll give you some time to also, shout out any websites that you want people to you want to direct people to, or, how people can contact you. But yeah, one of my last questions is kind of on competition, because you're kind of sitting in the middle of helping enterprises, and then we're also talking about the average user. So do you think we'll live in a world where people will still have the option to go to your traditional banks, or even with dealing with enterprises with traditional technology? Or do you think that if enterprises adopt blockchain technology or use something like Aleph Zero, that naturally the retail users just won't have any choice because they're just going to use the enterprise application? I'm talking B2C here, but yeah, that's my last question.
So I think that it's more going to be a multi-chain world, and then how you can think about it is more infrastructure as a service, right? So you have all these different blockchains that are out there, and what's going to happen is that the on the business side, on the enterprise side, they're just going to adopt a particular solution. And for the most part, a lot of these, all you really need is various standards. And these standards are more about data interoperability than they are about which technology stack that you're using. And then whenever it comes to whether or not retail is going to, actually adopt the same technology stack that the enterprise and corporates do, I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case, because what you're going to see is that you have this sort of multi-chain world, everybody's interconnected, and now retail is just going to use whatever platform and portal to access this sort of interconnected ecosystem that they feel the most comfortable with, right? So that's how I see it. It's more about a question of, where is their comfortability level whenever it comes to, which products that they're familiar with, that they want to support, that they're used to. But then what's going to happen is that on the back end, everybody's going to be communicating, and exchanging data and doing transactions, offloading transactions to a different chain, and so on and so forth. But the end user is just going to use whatever product that they like the best.
I think that's a great way to end things off. Pretty hopeful message, and I think I do agree with you. At the end, users will have most of the control, and I think that's what it's all about. The Web 3.0, users having control. Yeah, tell us how we can. How can people connect with you? How can they connect with your project and get involved?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. You can join us. You can follow us on Twitter. There is our website link is alephzero.org. You can also join our Telegram or Discord communities and just sort of follow along.
Awesome. Matthew, thank you so much for being here today. I think we went into a variety of topics. I think it was very interesting speaking to you from an academic perspective and all the interesting things you guys are working on. So really looking forward to having you here again, maybe in a few months.
Wonderful. No, thanks for having me, Roshan.
Thank you, Matthew. And I'm your host, Roshan Mirajkar, and I'll let you all tune back into Reimagine 2021 version 10. We're bringing you many more interviews, many more workshops, and check out our full YouTube library as well for all of our 500+ interviews. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy.